Breaker Point did not welcome anyone back. It swallowed them whole and kept moving. There were no banners, no handshakes, no speeches about sacrifice or service. If your boots crossed the line from sun-bleached concrete into the conditioning annex, you were already expected to perform. Titles dissolved here. So did excuses. Lieutenant Commander Talia Ward understood that the moment she stepped inside. She wanted it that way. Her transfer back into rotation had been processed quietly, just a name on a schedule, a locker key slid across a counter, a nod from a clerk who didn't bother to look twice. No one mentioned the months she'd been gone. No one mentioned the child she'd delivered. No one said, "Welcome home." Breaker Point didn't acknowledge transitions. It tested what remained after them. Talia moved through the annex like muscle memory given form. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Her posture was controlled, balanced, built from years of conditioning that didn't evaporate with time away. Her body had changed, but not weakened. Core tightened by recovery. Legs engineered for impact. Breath slower now, deeper, more deliberate. The only real difference was how she read a room. She didn't scan anymore. She understood. Breaker Point housed a rotating mix of Marines, SEALs, divers, contractors, techs, men at every stage of confidence and competence. Most were too exhausted or self-absorbed to notice anything beyond their own suffering. But a few noticed her. Not her rank. Not her history. They noticed fabric clinging where it didn't before. Sleeves tight around arms that didn't advertise effort. Hips that moved with certainty instead of uncertainty. They noticed she didn't speak unless required, and when she did, it wasn't performative. Some noticed her the wrong way. She passed a trio near the mats, young, lean, loud. Not catcalling. That would have implied ownership. They stared with the lazy confidence of men who believed the punchline was already theirs. One nudged another. A whisper passed between them. Smirks followed. Talia didn't break stride. She had a toddler at home who could out-yell all of them combined. In the conditioning bay, she worked like she never left. Pull-ups. Ropes. Sled drives. Every movement efficient, surgical. One of the instructors clocked her and gave a brief nod. Not for the numbers, but for the silence with which she carried them. Later, in the hydration tent, the murmurs grew louder. "I heard she just had a kid. That's the Navy standard now. She still moves, though. Someone should test how soft she really is." No names. No confrontation. Just the cowardice of men who believed consequence required witnesses. Talia set her bottle down and turned. She met their eyes once. Said nothing. Sometimes the weather doesn't warn before it breaks. The problem wasn't the comments. It was the certainty behind them. The assumption that she wouldn't respond. That rank didn't matter when bodies were alone. That motherhood meant malleability. That silence equaled permission. She finished her session and walked the annex perimeter alone. The men who had stared earlier fell quiet. But she noticed the exchanged glances. The way one lingered too long near the rinse gate. The way a supply clerk looked away too fast when handing her a code. Something had shifted. Not bravado, intent. Breaker Point's rinse wing wasn't hidden. It simply wasn't emphasized. A narrow concrete corridor wedged between water drills and dry lockers. Rusted pipes. Flickering industrial lights. Fans that clicked like tired metronomes. Humidity that clung to skin. It was designed for function, not comfort. Dump your soaked gear, rinse, move on. But people lingered there. Especially the wrong kind. On her first pass through, it felt routine. Hair dripping from underwater exits. Towel slung over one shoulder. Black PT shirt plastered to her back. Her posture discouraged conversation. Still, the air changed as she entered. Voices dipped, not from embarrassment, but recalculation. Past a stack of mesh bins, two trainees moved aside too quickly. One stared at the floor. The other stared at her chest too long, then pretended not to. Talia kept walking. The corridor told her more than the people. A torn black curtain hung midway, meant to divide wet from dry, but often pulled just enough to obscure movement. A utility door beyond it, lock broken, held shut with duct tape. A smiley face drawn in marker. Above it, a yellow caution sign, scratched until only 2 words remained legible. Count on. She looked up. Where a camera dome should have been, there was only paint discoloration. Hardware removed. Deliberately. Breaker point was wired everywhere else. RFID gates. Motion-logged mats. Surveillance at every access point. This corridor, though, this stretch of fog-slick concrete, was a blind spot by design. She stepped over a crumpled towel left behind without tags or initials. Not dropped accidentally. Left in a hurry. She pushed through the curtain and exited into the dry zone. A male tech passed her with relaxed indifference. Comfortable. Unquestioning. She filed that away. Predators thrived on comfort. On blind spots. As she walked out, she glanced back once. No one followed. But the corridor wasn't empty. It was waiting. They weren't close in rank or rotation, but Raw, Dana, and Harlan moved with the shared confidence of men who believed entitlement was invisible. Raw, stocky, loud, locker room bred, never used unless someone else was listening. Dana, leaner, sharper, treated humiliation like sport. Harlan, quiet, observant, collected reactions instead of jokes. They didn't act like a gang. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Talia overheard them just beyond the rinse wing. Crude comments. Laughter. A question spoken, softly enough to sound harmless. A conclusion delivered with certainty. She wouldn't say anything. She stood 2 doors down and listened without moving. They believed the corridor belonged to them. By evening, as drills ran long and steam filled the annex, Talia felt the shape of what was coming. A supply tech passed her and casually said the rinse wing was open for towel drop. The message wasn't on the schedule. The clipboard wasn't checked out. She nodded anyway. Some traps announce themselves. Others rely on routine. Talia stepped into the rinse wing alone, the fans clicking overhead, the air heavy and still. And behind her, the curtain opened, not swung. Pulled aside. Slowly. The rinse wing swallowed sound. Once the door sealed behind her, the familiar noises of breaker point faded. Boots on concrete, shouted counts, metal striking metal, replaced by the soft hiss of water lines and the uneven clicking of old industrial fans. The corridor felt narrower at night, as if the walls had leaned in after years of watching and learning. Talia adjusted the towel bag on her shoulder and took 3 steps forward before she felt it. Not footsteps, intent. Behind her, the air shifted. Weight redistributed. Movement without urgency, without noise. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The curtain didn't sway or flap. It was pulled back, carefully, like a veil lifted for a ritual that had already been rehearsed. They appeared in sequence. Raw first, broad frame, bare chest still damp from drills, towel looped around his neck. He smiled the way men smile when they believe ownership has already been decided. Behind him came Dana, grin stitched onto his face, wet sock dangling from one hand like a prop in a bad joke. And last was Harlan, arms folded, eyes steady, already cataloguing her reactions before she made them. Talia stopped. She didn't square up. She didn't tense. She let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Raw broke it. His voice stayed low, casual. Didn't expect you this late, She didn't answer. Dana chuckled. Not complaining. Looks like nature gave us a gift bag. Nothing. The fans clicked overhead. The curtain stilled. Then Dana said it, soft, deliberate, meant to land more than echo. Show us your boobs. The words didn't bounce off the walls. They sank into the corridor like something dropped into still water. Talia exhaled through her nose and shifted her stance by a fraction of an inch. Not fear. Not surprise. Disappointment. Move, she said. One word. Flat. Expectant. Raw tilted his head. You serious? Dana's grin widened. Come on. Don't pretend you wore that for you. She took 1 step forward. Just one. Her face unreadable. That was when the mood changed. They hadn't wanted power, they wanted proof. Proof they could force a reaction. Proof they could rewrite the moment and walk away laughing later. But she wasn't reacting like prey. She was measuring distance, angles, momentum. Harlan edged closer, half a step behind Raw, watching carefully. Talia dropped the towel bag. It hit the wet concrete with a dull slap. Last chance, she said. They didn't take it. Raw moved first, not boldly, not skillfully, just shamelessly. He stepped in with the swagger of a man who thought the space belonged to him. His hand came up fast and deliberate, fingers closing around her chest through soaked fabric. Not accidental. Not clumsy. Long enough to establish intent. Ownership. Dana laughed softly. Harlan watched. Talia didn't flinch. Her left hand snapped up and locked around Raw's wrist with bone-deep precision. Not a defensive grab, a control. She twisted and drove his arm backward into the pipe frame, pinning it just enough to make his shoulder rise and his breath hitch. Hands off, she said quietly. Raw tried to pull away. His arm didn't move. She released his wrist and slapped him. Open hand. Clean. Corrective. The sound cracked through the corridor sharper than the fans. Raw staggered half a step, shock racing across his face as a red handprint bloomed on his cheek. Not pain, the humiliation hit first. Silence. Harlan shifted, offended more than frightened. That was your last mistake, Talia said. Raw snarled, rubbing his cheek. You think you can do that? I know what I am, she cut in. Dana recovered enough to sneer. Mommy's got claws. She looked at him, not angry, just assessing. You don't talk like that, she said. Or what? He laughed. Harlan finally spoke, voice calm, almost gentle. You're alone back here. No cameras. No witnesses. Talia nodded once. Good. The word landed wrong. She rolled her shoulders, grounding herself. Now you can't hide behind accident. They stepped closer, no longer pretending. The rinse wing stopped being a hallway. It became a classroom. Raw charged first, anger leading muscle. No form. No control. Talia sidestepped, redirected his weight, and sent him crashing onto the wet concrete. He skidded into a pile of soaked towels with a grunt that knocked the breath from him. Dana lunged next, grabbing low, desperate for leverage. She turned into him, caught his forearm, planted her heel, and used his momentum against him. He slammed backward into a low bench, air driven from his lungs in a sharp wheeze. Harlan stayed back. Watching. Calculating. Talia faced him, breathing steady. Water dripped from her sleeves. Her soaked shirt clung to her frame, not revealing, not vulnerable, just irrelevant. You waiting for backup? She asked. His smirk flickered. He didn't move. She stepped past him. After 4 steps, she turned. Sit down. Something in her voice made it automatic. Raw dropped to one knee, clutching his ribs. Dana dragged himself onto the bench, staring at the floor. Harlan leaned against the wall, breathing heavier now. They finally saw it, not her body, not her rank. Hierarchy. She crouched to their level. You don't do this because you're strong, she said quietly. You do it because nobody corrected you. She stood and walked toward the exit. You wanted a mother's body, she said without turning. You found a seal behind it. The curtain fell closed behind her. And in that corridor without witnesses, 3 men sat in silence, realizing the lesson wouldn't fade, because it hadn't been written on paper. It had been etched into memory. They stayed on the floor longer than they meant to. Steam curled low through the rinse wing, blurring edges and softening outlines, but nothing blurred what had happened. Raw sat hunched. One hand pressed to his ribs, the other slack at his side, like it no longer trusted him. Dana stared at the concrete as if it might open and swallow the moment whole. Harlan leaned back against the wall, breathing carefully, as though even air required permission now. None of them spoke. Not because they were stunned by pain. Pain faded. What lingered was the silence she had left behind. She hadn't yelled. Hadn't threatened paperwork or rank. She had corrected them the way professionals corrected mistakes, efficiently, without emotion, without witnesses. That terrified them more than any report ever could. They stood only when she told them to. No swagger. No jokes. Raw's cheek still burned where her hand had landed, the mark impossible to ignore. Dana's fingers trembled as he crossed his arms to hide it. Harlan straightened slowly, eyes no longer hunting angles. She made them repeat the words. Every one of them. And when she left, the corridor felt smaller. Like it remembered. Private Second-Class Jordan Sims had heard it all from the edge of the mop closet. The voices. The slap. The sudden absence of noise afterward. He hadn't moved. Not during. Not after. Men like Sims survived by staying invisible. He'd learned early that proximity without participation was its own kind of shield. But when Talia stepped out into the hallway, she was waiting for him. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked. "I didn't do anything," he said too quickly. "That's the problem," she replied. The words carried weight without heat. Accuracy, not anger. "You knew," she continued. "And you watched." He swallowed. "I didn't think it would go that far." "You thought it would go just far enough," she said. "Close enough to enjoy." She gave him a choice without framing it as one. "You're going to deliver a message." Sims nodded, not because he wanted to, but because he understood how thin the line was between omission and complicity. There was no report filed. No incident number. No administrative trail. Breaker Point didn't need one. Facilities like that didn't operate on paper alone. They ran on rumor, posture, absence. By morning, the rinse wing felt different. Not quiet like a trap, but quiet like a warning sign everyone agreed to read. The men who had treated it like a playground avoided it. Others walked through without knowing why their shoulders stayed tight until they exited. Raw didn't show up for morning combatives. Someone muttered about a knee strain. No one asked. Dana returned, but his volume stayed low, jokes landing without laughter. He didn't look at the women in the locker bay. Harlan said nothing at all. And for the first time, others watched him the way he'd watched them. Sims delivered the message the only way he could, quietly. One man. Then another. The story changed with each telling, but the center held. They tried. They lost. She didn't even breathe hard. Talia carried on as if nothing had happened. Clean drills. Correct form. No glance backward. A female corpsman passed her in the stairwell later that day and murmured, "Thank you." Talia didn't slow. "Don't thank me," she said. "Stay loud." By afternoon, the annex had recalibrated. Not through rules, but through repercussion. Respect hadn't been demanded, it had been restored. And then they came to her. Not together. Not boldly. Raw approached first at the edge of the outdoor rack bay, shoulders rounded. Dana followed, hands in pockets. Harlan brought up the rear, quieter than ever. Dana started, then stopped. Talia turned her head just enough. Raw spoke instead. "We were wrong." She faced them fully. "You were dangerous," she corrected. No one disagreed. "If you ever do that again," she said calmly, "I won't be the one correcting you." They understood. That was enough. She walked away. The rinse wing belonged to her now, not because she claimed it, but because no one dared forget. And in a place built to erase memory, that made all the difference. Tomorrow, Breaker Point would keep testing bodies. But something else had shifted. And it wouldn't shift back. Breaker Point did not change overnight. The concrete stayed cracked. The fans still clicked with that uneven, tired rhythm. The torn curtain in the rinse wing remained torn, the pipes still rusted, the caution sign still half erased. No construction crew arrived. No safety memo went up on the board. No commanding officer gathered everyone together to talk about culture or conduct. And yet, everything moved differently. Men who used to linger didn't. Conversations that once dropped into smirks now ended early. Eyes that had wandered learned where to land, and where not to. The rinse wing stopped being a shortcut and became a place people passed through quickly, heads forward, hands busy, aware in a way they hadn't been before. Not because of fear of reports. Because of memory. Talia didn't claim the space. She never had to. She walked through it the same way she walked through the rest of Breaker Point, steady, uninterested, exact. She didn't look around to measure impact. She wasn't counting reactions. She was there to recalibrate, nothing more. That was the part most people misunderstood. She hadn't done what she did to teach a lesson, or to make a statement, or to protect a reputation. She hadn't done it for justice or revenge or closure. She had corrected a problem. That was it. The difference mattered. Systems failed all the time. Paperwork went missing. Complaints softened as they climbed the chain. Eyewitnesses forgot what they'd seen when authority asked them to remember. Everyone at Breaker Point knew that. They'd all learned the gaps. They'd all learned where cameras didn't reach and accountability thinned out into suggestion. The men who tried to corner her thought those gaps were theirs. They were wrong. Correction didn't require an audience. It required precision. Raw felt it every time he moved wrong after that night. Not in his ribs, they healed, but in how his body flinched whenever someone stepped too close behind him. He stopped taking up space he hadn't earned. He stopped touching shoulders that didn't belong to him. He stopped assuming laughter would cover intent. Dana learned it in smaller ways. In jokes that died mid-sentence. In eyes that didn't flicker his way anymore. In the realization that the same mouth that once made people uncomfortable now sounded foolish when it kept pushing. He didn't get softer. He got quieter. And that was worse for him. Harlan learned it last. He learned it in absence. Men didn't stand near him the same way. Conversations ended when he joined them. Not dramatically. Just subtly. Enough to make him feel watched instead of watching. Enough to remind him that silence wasn't neutrality, it was a choice people remembered. Sims learned it too. He didn't become brave overnight. He didn't start shouting warnings or playing hero. But he stopped looking at the wall when voices dropped. He started clearing his throat. Asking questions that didn't seem like questions. Standing where he could be seen. Proximity, just like she'd said. And that was how the message spread, not as a story about a fight, but as a recalibration of limits. People argued quietly about what should have happened. About reports and consequences and whether silence was enough. But the arguments never went far, because the corridor itself answered them. No one tested it again. Talia kept training. She carried sandbags. Ran load drills. Took hits on the combatives' grid and gave them back with the same controlled efficiency. She didn't soften. She didn't harden. She remained exactly what she had always been. A standard. Not because of rank. Not because of fear. Because of clarity. Late one afternoon, as the sun dropped low and cast long shadows across the annex, she walked through the rinse wing one last time before rotating out of that cycle. The floor was dry. The curtain hung still. Someone had scrubbed the mildew off the pipes, not as maintenance, but as instinct. A junior admin passed her going the opposite direction. Met her eyes. Nodded. Didn't hurry. Behind her, the corridor stayed quiet. Not empty. Quiet. That mattered. Outside, Breaker Point carried on. New faces arrived. Others rotated out. Stories blurred into legend, then into something vaguer. Don't mess around back there. Watch how you move. She shut it down once. No one said her name out loud much anymore. They didn't need to. The lesson no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the space. And spaces remember. Years later, when another woman would walk through that same corridor, wet gear, tired shoulders, eyes forward, nothing would happen. No whispers. No smirks. No hands testing boundaries. She'd never know why. That was the real victory. Not the slap. Not the takedowns. Not the frozen silence afterward. The victory was absence. The absence of entitlement. The absence of permission. The absence of men who thought consequence required witnesses. Breaker Point would keep training warriors. It always would. But somewhere between rusted pipes and flickering lights, something else had been reinforced. Not policy. Not protocol. Order. And it had been restored not by cameras, not by paperwork, not by command, but by a woman who had been mistaken for a weakness. She was a mother. She was a SEAL. And once was more than enough. Because some lessons don't need to be recorded. They only need to be remembered.